I always say it comes down to a handful of things, but I mean, obviously you need to have a great product. So it starts with selling something that works. At the end of the day, if we didn't have a great product, then we wouldn't really exist in the business. So that's kind of number one where I start. But number two is just having great people. I think ultimately our success is driven by the quality of our individuals and their ability not just to build that product, but also to sell and service it. So to me, those are the two big ones that I see that's kind of fueling a lot of our growth.
Welcome to Growth Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? How important are your company core values? Those core values really can be the backbone of your company, the culture, how you work together, how you navigate change, how you create opportunity and innovate. Your core values really do mean something. A lot of companies think they're kind of fluffy or they're things that we put on the wall and they're just words. But the reality of fast growth companies I've seen, they put an overemphasis on this. And the overemphasis really is about making it a part of the hiring process, the onboarding, the leading and development process, and the rituals and routines and recognition that are necessary inside of our culture. So with your core values, are they really working for you? Are you living them? Today's guest is Todd Olson. He is a co-founder at Pendo. Pendo is number 73 on the Inc. list in 2019. They have over 400 employees, and over time, they've seen how important the values are for the company. And as they continue to grow, as they continue to push beyond this, it really has been a central part of the reason why they're growing fast. So here's the interview with Todd Olson. Hi, Todd. How are you?
I'm well. How you doing, Gene?
I am fantastic. Great to have you here at Growth Think Tank. I've already let our audience know a little bit about you at a personal level, but tell us about Pendo.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. Pendo is a 6-year-old software company founded back in late 2013. We exist to help companies improve the experience of their software applications. If you imagine all the software you engage with in your daily lives, we help, one, measure how people use it so the people building it can create a better experience. And two, we help those companies create in-app experiences. Think of them as step-by-step onboarding, guided tours, so that you can get value out of the software using on a day-by-day basis.
Love that idea. I have clients that are in the SaaS space, and I ask them about usage of it, and they never really have a good, we could pull that information out, but they don't have it at their fingertips. I think it'd be pretty valuable to understand usage of your platform.
Well, it sounds like they're good candidates for Pendo, right? You should just keep pointing them our way, Gene.
We could talk about that. When you think about, growing your company fast, what are some of the biggest things that, move the needle for you in reaching like number 73 on the list for 2019?
I always say it comes down to a handful of things, but I mean, obviously you need to have a great product. So it starts with selling something that works. At the end of the day, if we didn't have a great product, then we wouldn't really exist in the business. So that's kind of number one where I start. But number two is just having great people. I think ultimately our success is driven by the quality of our individuals and their ability not just to build that product, but also to sell and service it. So to me, those are the two big ones that I see that's kind of fueling a lot of our growth.
Well, we're not going to talk about the product as much today as you probably want to. We're going to talk about the people that create this and make this happen. What are the things inside of people that you really feel like align you together and really create the kind of culture you want?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think it comes down to values. Every company is a little bit different. I think there's, apologies for using the word twice, but there's value in defining what those values are so that you can, one, be transparent with prospective employees, two, make sure you're setting good expectations, and three, make sure there's some commonality between everyone and kind of how we're going to work together as human beings.
Well, I'd love to kind of walk through the process of how you created your values. I don't know if there's anything special there, but just Tell us a little bit about how you came up with them.
Yeah. So day one, started the company, 4 co-founders in a room. We kind of said, what do we care about in having a business? We're creating this thing for nothing. We can have whatever values we want. There was no else is here, right? So, but also it's a great exercise as a founding team. Hey, can we agree on something, the 4 of us, right? A finance set. So like, given some of us have worked together, but some of us hadn't, I thought it was a really good exercise. We devised 4 values. And I think, of course, at that time, I would characterize them as aspirational values. And different companies have different type of values. You'll learn. Like some are aspirational. We want to behave this way, so we put it up on our wall. Some are more about the reality of the situation. Hey, this is how we behave. We're going to put up on the wall so everyone knows this is how we're going to behave, right? So those are kind of more behavioral. So all of ours at first, because we had never worked together, were aspirational, and they centered around a handful of things. A couple of them stand out. I was really passionate around this notion of having customer as an important part of our value. So we had a customer-oriented value. One of our co-founders worked at Cisco, where bias to act was a big part of that culture. So he was very passionate about bias to act. We all had families. So, and all of us wanted to keep our families. So we had some sort of balance, work-life balance, a component to it. So we kind of, and we had a 4th, which I won't mention because we don't have it anymore. But we set that as kind of the first aspirational values. 2 years later, we got together as an executive team. So of course that team is no longer 4 people. It's about 8 people. And we said, hey, do these values still speak to us? Do they sort of represent not only who we are, but who we want to be? And we changed them. We removed 1, and added 4. So we ended up with 7.
Okay.
And we adjusted the words on all of them. Actually, except for bias to act. That was the one that actually has been the same value since the very, very beginning. It's otherwise, yeah, we've kind of adjusted the language, adjusted the words, and then we added 4, and those were, hey, this is how we are behaving. We should be transparent about it and put it up on the wall so people know. That included things like brutal honesty, which is one of our more unique values. Very, very few companies have the word brutal in a value. So the fact that we do, it says a lot about our culture. And honestly, we've had a lot of debates about that value. We debated about changing it to radical candor. We debated changing it to just honesty. We we've had honesty but kindness. That's been a proposal. We're still just brutal honesty. So, but that's kind of how we've gotten to this position, and we do evaluate our core values as an executive team every year. We have not made changes, but we do look at it every year.
Well, once you had them kind of locked in, you had about 8 employees or so this last.
Well, that was 8 people in the leadership team. That was years ago. So we probably about 30 employees when we locked them in.
When you think about how you use them today, I'm going to run through a couple of places I see them used. And so I would like to have you comment on that. In the hiring process, how important are your values in selecting the right people?
Well, very important. They're instrumental, right? In every scorecard for every candidate we have at Pendo, we have each value enumerated, and there's someone on the interview team responsible for asking behavior-oriented questions around the values. So that's number one. Second, when I do my executive interview, which I interview nearly every person at the company, I'm always looking for, are they referencing the values? Heck, do they even know them? Some people don't know the exact words. Some people have them clearly in front of them, and that indicates obviously a level of preparation, desire to be part of the company that sets themselves apart, right? So just so those are just 2 easy things that, yeah, absolutely a critical part of the hiring process.
When you say the behavioral questions, I mention this a lot to people, and I've done all kinds of little videos around this. Have you thought about them intentionally? How do we ask questions that will actually allow us to see where they rank on a brutal honesty kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. They're all about stories and examples. And our goal always in the interview process is to capture the story and example in the notes so that we're, all of us that are reviewing the package later can see what they are. We have a battery of questions. It's a sample. People can select from the sample. So it's not all the same to every single person. But yeah.
And that's what I suggest to it. Do you have a favorite question in there that kind of gives you something that you can share?
I actually just do my own questions. So I'm not one that actually follows so I don't have one in particular. Yeah, I have other favorite questions, but they're unrelated to values.
Awesome. Well, outside the hiring process, I see that these values typically show up in the onboarding process of employees. Or do you use something specifically in onboarding?
Yeah, so I personally do an onboarding class with every cohort of new hires, and the purpose of mine is to go over mission, vision, values, company history. And in the values portion, I spend a good 15, 20 minutes, not just saying this is the value, but this is how it's lived. This is an example of a situation where someone has lived it and or not lived it, right? And I try to be as specific as possible, and tie it back to other policies. So for example, freedom and responsibility is a value. And I talk about our open alcohol policy or our open vacation policy and talk about what are good examples of freedom and responsibility and what are poor examples of freedom and responsibility within that value, right, in context. So these are, sometimes it can get kind of fun. Sad to say that every example I give is a real example. So wasn't that fun when I experienced it. But it's a great way to help convey what they mean.
Hold on for a second. Todd just talked about the values in the hiring process. Now, are you doing all that you can to create the right systems behind it to support your team and hiring the people that have the same values as you do and as you really value inside your company? Well, one way to do that is by creating a list of questions that really align to the behaviors within the values. So you have to do a little bit of thinking around this. What kind of stories would you ask? What kind of questions? What are the things that would really allow you to tune into how that person feels about these values? How are they operating in a natural way? And if you can create those questions, then your team can use it, and then they can give that to you back in sort of a scorecard, much like Todd described. So that's a really powerful way for you to create and use the values inside your company. Now back to the interview with Todd. I love that. It's a missed opportunity that I think a lot of companies aren't doing inside of their onboarding process, is talk about those values and give examples. And rarely is it led by one of the co-founders. So I think that's a really good place for you. Another area that I see values being used is inside the development of employees, like how they're growing, how they're kind of interacting with each other. What do you do there specifically?
Yeah, so we have what's called best self-review. It's kind of a quarterly review process for all employees. When I say, it's a review, I know some managers are like, oh man, like that's a lot of work, right? So like it's intended to be a little bit lighter. We want more frequent sets of feedback rather than one exhaustive feedback that like burns everyone out. But within that context, it's how well does the person live the core values, and what are some specific examples of that, and what are some specific examples where they could live them better, right? So we're trying to foster two-way dialogue between the manager and the individual on the values specifically, and what they can do more, or even in course of what they're doing well.
Now, I love the fact that you have the more often feedback, right? Because a lot of companies have moved away from the quote unquote yearly review. They're still trying to find the right balance of more frequent feedback. What have you learned on this frequency of feedback?
I learned people want it. So what we did was first quarter, because I've had like PTSD from annual review cycles. So even me as a CEO, our VP people say, we're going to do a review. I'm like, whoa, that sounds awful. Even though candidly, like it won't really affect my life too much because, everyone reports to me as a C-level, and, it's fine, it doesn't take, I only have a few direct reports, in terms of, comparing me to the average manager of the company. But I have empathy for my leadership team, and I know how much time it takes. So I've been there, done that, right? So with the first quarter, we made it elective. Like the manager will only fill out a review if the employee initiates, is what our policy was. And that way it was nice. Like, hey, if you don't want to get feedback, we don't want to be the kind of people shoving it down your throat. Now, if you're the kind of employee that never wants feedback, well, are you living brutal honesty? If you never want to get brutal honesty, probably not. But so by making it elective, what we learned was like actually most people want it. By and large, it's like 85% of the people, when given the choice of having feedback or not having feedback, filled it out. And I think that's really eye-opening, right? So while some managers think no one wants to go through this review process, turns out most people do.
Well, I have seen that the same with my clients as well. They want more often feedback, and much more often than what's currently happening. So one last area I want to talk about here is kind of leading feedback and making sure that this is not just a put it on the wall kind of value, but we're actually living it every day. So what are some of the things you're doing to make sure that you're living the values?
A couple things. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of what the team has devised is we have this program called PANKS. And what it is a peer recognition system for the values. So all day, every day, people say, hey, Sally, I'm going to give Sally a PANK for bias to act because I saw her, just take the reins on this project and get it done without being asked. That's an example. But the way it works is each employee can recognize one value per month. At the end of the quarter, we tally up awards for who got the most recognitions in that quarter. And it allows you to really highlight people that are living the values, and you go through every single one of them, and the person with the most PANKs gets honored as well. So it's a really fun process. And what's nice about it is that living values become a revered thing, and a really positive thing. So that's probably one of the biggest things that we do. I guess the other big thing that I really emphasize is at the beginning of every single meeting, we talk about what is our mission, what is our core values. And then within the town hall meetings, we also will give a lot more examples for, this is someone we saw live maniacal focus on customer, right? So a lot of tie back to the values. It's one thing to say, hey, we're going to do X. It's another thing like, hey, we're going to do X, and here's why our values helped us make this decision. Big difference, right? Like a great example, actually. We were threatened by a lawsuit for patent infringement a year ago or so. Most people, when they're threatened with a lawsuit, don't tell the entire company. We didn't have to tell the entire company. There's no legal reason to do so. Some managers would think it could incite fear. Maybe some people would start looking for other jobs. But I decided to tell the entire company. Literally the moment I knew about it, or maybe the week after. I mean, at least had some conversation with a lawyer to make sure this wasn't like doomsday for us or anything to that effect. But honestly, we told people as soon as we know why I do that, because I knew that meetings would start popping up on calendars, hallway conversations would start happening. Last thing I want to do is it like gradually leak out, or somehow people think that we're not telling people, or oh my gosh, maybe we should be worried because they're not saying anything about it, right? So it's a really good example where he said, look, we're going to tell you all this thing. We don't have to. We're going to also treat you like adults and respect you, and assume you're not going to go around and, given it as a legal proceedings, like not talk about it outside the rooms or not make these kinds of statements because we trust you. But here's the deal. and by the way, we're going to win this thing, and this is how we're going to do it, things like that. So, so that's probably a really good example of something specific.
And that goes right along with the brutal honesty.
Exactly. People probably, and you can certainly poll our employee base, think that we have some like crazy things happening that they don't know about. Frankly, there aren't. There may be some things in my head that I'm like contemplating, but they're like wild, crazy ideas in my head. They're definitely not near reality. So I don't share people like my crazy pipe dreams, but if we have something that's nearing reality, yeah, you're going to hear about it.
Now, hold on for a second here. Todd just mentioned about peer recognition. Now, I want to kind of chime in here because when you think about peer recognition, you may be thinking about, people giving some appreciation inside of meetings, and that is part of it. But if you created some real structure around what peer recognition is and around why they're doing it, and in my opinion, if you really use the values as a center point behind that and see who is getting living those values on a regular basis, you can have employees of the month, of the quarter. It's really up to you. But if you have a ritual process behind this, those peer recognitions can be really powerful. And guess what? You don't have to, create feedback loops, and you don't have to do a formal review process. But it does allow you to tune in to who's doing what, who's living the values, who's appreciating other people. So it is a great way for you to have kind of your eyes out there, seeing where people are growing and where they are not. So peer recognition can be used in your advantage if you're willing to make that investment and be intentional about it. Now back to the interview with Todd. Well, I love the fact that, Todd, you have a fast-growing company and that you put so much emphasis on values. I talk to a lot of companies that wonder why they're not growing, and I ask them what their values are, and they're like, oh, we used to have some stuff, but it just, I don't know, it just seems fluffy, and I have to go through this over and over, so I'll be able to point them back to this episode. Is there any one thing that you feel like the values do for the culture that you would like to share with us today?
I think the values define the culture in many ways, so who we are and what we're about and how we operate is definitely guided by our values. In many ways, I think of it kind of like our compass rose, like when we're lost or when we have maybe a tough quarter, or even a really good quarter, I think back, I do kind of a state of the company address every quarter to the entire business. And it's kind of like a reflection on our last quarter. It's a looking ahead to the first. I can tell you where I start my speech always comes back to what does our values say in this moment? How should we use them as, again, a compass road or a guidepost for us to look towards, help guide us through the next phase, so in chapter. So yeah, and that's where it's at. It comes back to those. They've served us well getting us to those points. As long as we continue to remember doing them, I think it's going to serve us well in the future. It's core to how we operate.
Well, Todd, I appreciate you being here at Growth Think Tank, sharing with you, with our listeners here, some of the insights that have really grown your business.
My pleasure.
I just love that interview because core values are such an important part of how a company works together, how they create opportunity, how they treat each other. Your core values are the backbone of your company. Now, when you think about growing your company and you have core values, it kind of just like they are part of what we do, but they're just not really living it, then it really is up to leadership. Is it up to you to be the kind of person that drives that impact to make it something that is impactful and make it a core part of the business? When you as a leader put an emphasis on it, when you create the recognition, the rituals, routines behind it, you will have people pay attention to it. And when you actually are hiring people with those core values in mind, you have ability to create a real kind of strong force inside the business. Now, all those things were covered in the interview, so you may be wondering, where are you right now with your values? Where are you missing on opportunity? If you have any questions, make sure you reach out to me at gene@genehammett.com. And if you are enjoying these podcast interviews, make sure you share it with a friend. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.